This is the Inclusion Think Tank podcast, where we talk about inclusive education, why it works, and how to make it happen. My guest on today's episode is Michelle Lockwood. Michelle shares an overview of her 2 workshops from the Summer Inclusion Conference that was held back in June. The workshops were titled Responding to Diverse Behavioral Needs with a Layered Approach and Addressing Requests for Close Adult Assistance and Planning to Fade It. Michelle shares takeaways that attendees would have gained from attending her workshops and also some of her favorite resources that she would recommend to our listeners. I would like to welcome everyone back to a new episode of the Inclusion Think Tank podcast, brought to you by All In for Inclusive Education. And today I'm joined by my guest, Michelle. So, Michelle, thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Yes. So, welcome to the podcast. And to begin, can you start by sharing a little bit about yourself? Some things people like to share are how they became interested in the world of education and inclusive education, a little bit about your job, and things that you like to do for fun in your free time, if you have any.
All right. So I guess education and starting in this field, that started back when I worked in the state of Maryland. I had a county-wide support position, and this is going back to now don't do any math about my age or anything, but this is going back to probably around 98, 99, when I first started. And it just seemed like a natural fit, helping schools, help students with disabilities be successful. It wasn't specific to inclusive education. It was just about going to the different schools and providing training and technical assistance and support to the teachers, typically around behavior. And so that started me within the field of education, and I enjoyed it so much. As time passed, I got married, and my husband and I decided we wanted to move back to where I'm from, which is New Jersey, move back here, when we bought a house. So we've been in the house for 18 years now. So it's going back a hair over 18 years. We decided to move back to New Jersey, came back here. I had done some work when I was in Maryland, just some trainings and things like that for the Maryland Coalition for Inclusive Education. And so I thought, oh, wow, back then, there's a New Jersey Coalition for Inclusive Education. I want to work with them. So I stalked the organization a little bit, and finally got myself a job. Back then, we were very, very small. Very small. We had, I believe, a part time secretary. It was myself and our previous CEO, and that was it. Um, and
Wow.
so, but the thing was, when it comes to inclusive education, I didn't think anything of it. I just thought, well, this is what happens. You have kids with disabilities, they go to their neighborhood schools, they're in classes with kids that don't have disabilities. That's how it had always been in the district and the county that I came from in Maryland. Now here in New Jersey, and again, this is going back 18 years when I started, I realized things were not the same at all. It was very different. Very different. And so that started me becoming a lot more passionate about including students with disabilities and about their rights to be there, and about and also too, even just working with different families and seeing how hard families would have to fight to have their child included. It just it just seemed wrong in my heart, and kind of propelled me to want to do anything and everything I can to make this happen, and to make it not just about including a student in physical placement in a classroom, but really they have the right to be a member who belongs there, who is participating in general education with typical peers and learning. And that's our responsibility to make that happen. So that's kind of how I got involved in all of this. And in terms of what do I like to do for fun in my free time, I don't know if I like it, but I'll go to the gym and I'll exercise. So I do that. I like to read a lot, but I'm kind of funny. I have to read. It has to be a paper book. I don't read a Kindle or a
Oh,
screen or any of
wow.
technology. It has to be a paper book. So that's the other thing I like to do. And finding paper books is always interesting these days too. And I like to spend time with family, spend time with my husband. We have a cat, so we definitely like to spend time with him because he demands it. I'm surprised we don't see him walking across any minute, deciding he needs to get his attention. One of the years when we were virtual at NJC, back when we were NJCIE, one of the years when we were virtual, we did a virtual Christmas card, kind of a mailing, and each person had their little Zoom, profile photo taken, and we sent it
Oh,
out to everybody. I looked at mine and I realized my cat was on the back of my chair. So you've got like a cat's tail coming out the side of my head, and like his head's over here. So he's a member of the organization too, I guess.
yes. Oh, that's great. I love what you said about reading and having to read like the actual hold a physical book. Yeah, I used to be that way. I have a tall bookshelf here in my house and of all the books that I've read, but then I discovered a Kindle one year and I was like, oh, this is this is the way to go. And more recently I've discovered in the last few years, audiobooks. So I really
Mm-hmm.
enjoy an audiobook, but I have to be at home. I can't listen to it like in the car or anything like that. Like I
I
have to,
can't pay attention. Like, yeah,
yeah,
not that
definitely
good at
have to be at home.
multitasking.
Right. My next question I have for you, you got into it a little bit, but how do you define inclusive education?
And I guess, like I had started to mention, really, inclusive education is more than the physical placement. It's about individuals with disabilities being true members of the environment that they're in. And it's about individuals with disabilities being enabled to have that civil right of being able to participate meaningfully in instructional activities right alongside those kiddos that don't have disabilities. It's funny, going into different schools in my role through, all in, you see a lot of different things, you hear a lot of different things, you hear a lot of
Mhm.
misunderstandings about what inclusive education is. I'll hear, sometimes when I'm doing individual consultations around specific students and helping the district support them in general education settings, I'll hear people say, "Oh, she's just in there for socialization." It's like, no,
Oh,
no, 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 no. She's in there to learn, just like everybody else. Everybody else is going to learn some socialization skills there too, because that happens in the context of
right.
the classroom learning environment. But no, she's there to learn the academics too. That's her right. So
Yeah.
thinking about inclusive education from that perspective as to what our kids deserve.
Yeah. Yeah, we had I had a guest on the podcast in a previous episode that also said that inclusive education is not just it's not a placement and that is really it's always great to hear people's definitions and how similar they can be about what inclusive education is and then the work that we all do here at All In and like you said, you go into the different schools and you hear those types of statements and the work that you do is important to help change the way that people see inclusive education as just a place where someone can get socialization and and that kind of stuff. But like you said, everybody's there to learn, and every student can learn in their own way with the proper support. So it's really
Mm-hmm.
important. The work that we do is really important. So thank you for that definition. So, this season on the podcast, we are highlighting some of the presenters from our recent All In Summer Inclusion Conference that was held back in June. And you facilitated two sessions. Your first session was titled Start with the End in Mind, Tips and Tools for Addressing Requests for Close Adult Assistant and Planning to Fade It. Your second presentation was titled Beyond the Basics, Responding to Diverse Behavioral Needs with a Layered Approach. So, this next question is actually two parts, and it's really two parts because you will be discussing both of your presentations. But can you first provide a summary of each of your presentations and tell us a little bit what each presentation was about?
Sure, sure. So the session that I did on layered behavioral supports, it I started thinking about things when I'm in different districts. I'll find that student behavior is something that a lot of times people will use as, I don't know, the reason or the excuse as to why a student can't be included in a general education classroom. Oh, well, she's not ready because she's not able to sit and attend quietly for, a lot of times there's behavioral pieces to it. So I know whenever we're doing our conferences and whenever I get a chance, I like to make sure that I'm able to offer a session around supporting student behavior that could be done in any setting. So it's not just specific to an English classroom at the secondary level, that some of these principles apply in general across all levels, across all content areas. And so with respect to the one on layered behavior support, it was taking what we know about the research behind behavior and what evidence-based practices there are to help students be successful in a classroom setting, using that as kind of our base layer, so to speak. I usually will bring in the term class-wide PBIS or class-wide positive behavioral interventions and supports, that at that base layer, there are things that we do to help all students be successful. We need to make sure that our expectations are crystal clear. We need to make sure that we've taught them about rules, routines, and procedures, and how to do the learning in this class and how it looks. And we've made that clear, as well as making sure that consequences are clear to everyone. So it's not just something that seems arbitrary, and also engaging students actively and thinking about which ways we're going to do that. So that's evidence-based practices, class-wide PBIS as our base layer. It'd be great if every student was going to be successful in terms of behavior with that just in place. But we know that in reality, there's still behavioral issues that crop up. So now helping teachers understand that in any classroom, you also can add in another layer of targeted support to meet the needs of the students that you have based on the behavioral data that you're seeing. Typically, when I speak with teachers, I'll say, okay, so when do kids typically misbehave in your class? People always have, people know, kids, what's going to happen. You know that if my class is right after lunch and I'm in a
Mm-hmm.
middle school setting, that I'm going to have kids who have difficulty struggling in from lunch. They're going to be late. They're going to have their mind on whatever social things were happening during lunch. And that's just the way it goes. So if I know that, then I need to think about an extra layer of what I'm going to do to
Mm-hmm.
help kids be successful during that potential, what I'll call trigger time. We know that a lot of times towards the end of class, the last few minutes, kids get antsy. All right, so if that's something, what kind of strategies can we put into place to address that? We know that if I'm trying to give directions and do a lot of teacher-led whole group instruction, that kids might be talking, they might be off task. That may be another one of those trigger times. So what can I embed within that to engage students more effectively? Can I embed opportunities for them to respond and use all the research around OTRs and put it in place during those times? So that session really focused on the base layer, but then identifying some other layers that are targeted to what's happening in that classroom. So you don't feel like you're having to do everything all at once, and you don't feel like you're having to address each issue on the fly. I know teachers will always say to me, if they have a class and all of a sudden they have several students with behavior plans and they all have highly individualized behavior plans, and they've got, this one has a token system and this one has this, is it gets difficult for a teacher to manage. That's just the reality. So how do we look at this much like we look at MTSS and tiered supports in any setting, where there's the base layer, then we're adding things on instead of taking every situation and making it its own problem, so to speak.
Yeah.
So that's the behavior session in a nutshell. And my other session, which I'm excited about, it seems like when I go into a lot of different districts, there's presumption around students with disabilities, especially those with more complex needs, and what level of adult support they need and what that's supposed to look like. And we start to get into this whole world of paraprofessionals, one-to-one aides, and how that can be a wonderful thing, or it can be something that's detrimental to our kids' reality. We know the research on how that causes some distance between typical peers and your guy with a disability who has that adult support. We know that sometimes classroom teachers will take less responsibility for students who have that a support adult in the room. So we know there's a lot of negative or potential detrimental effects of it. So how do we design how we're going to look at providing extra supports to kids in a way where we're picturing not those problematic situations, where we're picturing what we want to have at the end. We want this child to be independent. We want them to be engaged. We want them to be productive in class. We want them to feel like they're part of the class. If that's what I want, how do I identify, one, what types of supports that individual needs to be successful? And maybe it is personal support and a support adult, but then what specifically is that adult doing, and how are we going to then plan to fade it back? Because it seems like you'll hear people say at meetings, oh, well, she has autism, so if she's going to be in general education, she's going to need a one-to-one, without even talking about what that individual would be doing. So that second session that I did was all around developing a process for this, really identifying specifically what that support individual is going to be doing, because that's our base for figuring out how we start to fade back what that adult is doing, instead of parroting back whatever directions a teacher gives. Okay, instead, I still have an active role as that support individual. I'm going to redirect my student to, oh, what did Mrs. Smith just say? To realize that he needs to take direction from the classroom teacher. It's not always going to be someone sitting next to them there to translate. So how we provide supports and what that looks like, and how we are working towards that effective end in mind. And that was the second session. And both sessions, the way I kind of put them together is that I'll develop resources, things that teachers can use, things that districts can use, and put them together on a resource Padlet and share that with the participants as well, so they can reference things later on. So I did that for both of those two sessions as well.
Yeah, I've been working with the organization since 2021, and I always love the conferences. They have so many great sessions, and it's a shame that everybody can't attend every session. But yeah, they those sound like really really great sessions with a lot of information. And as you mentioned, putting all the information on the Padlet so everybody can go back and reference that. That's a really great idea. Can you share one or two takeaways from each of the sessions that attendees would have learned from those sessions?
Okay, I guess with respect to the behavior session, one is that we can use evidence-based practices on a whole class level, and that's something that should be in place in every classroom. And here's how you can make it your own. So really looking at, how do you define expectations? How do you actively engage students? How do you set up rules, routines, and procedures? But I'm also going to have the responsibility as a teacher for that second takeaway, that not everybody is going to be 100% wonderfully behaved at every moment in time. And so what do I do when misbehavior does occur? How do I look at that in the way that's most effective, but also most efficient, instead of just kind of hoping and praying that behavior doesn't happen? How can I use what I know about students to design some more targeted interventions and layer that on top? So it doesn't mean in lieu of my class-wide plan. It just means in addition to. And with respect to the session on identifying needs for close adult support and also fading it, it was really to help people understand that it's not why you would identify that an individual needs a specific adult to be involved in providing their education, that it has to go back to the IEP. There has to be pieces in there that It's not just, oh, it would be nice to have an extra adult in the room to help Sally be successful. It's, in order to implement this IEP, we need to have that support adult. So if it starts with my process, with that being reflected in how do I implement this IEP, what's necessary, not just nice, but necessary, then that also gives me the logic to think, okay, so then every time I come to the table and we look at this IEP and we talk about progress, we're also talking about how am I progressing on some of those pieces that I identified warranted that close adult support, or that support adult being in the room, and how am I systematically planning to fade that back. So using regular IEP meetings as part of this conversation. Um, and so I'm developing those fade plans, and it's just part and parcel of my process. And so that would be one of the other takeaways from that session. Because it seems like if you can connect those things together, then it's not, you don't get into the situation where, oh yeah, she's always had a 1-to-1 aide ever since first grade, and here she is in high school. Because it just seems like sometimes if we're not actively looking at things as part of a process every single year at different points in the year, we fall into those traps.
Wow, that's something I'd never thought about. That's really that's so true. Yeah. Wow. So thank you for sharing information about both of your sessions. And to wrap up our conversation, um, we're putting together a resource guide from our guests. So can you share a few resources that you commonly use or that you would suggest to our listeners to look into?
Sure. I can, well, number one, I can give you the links to both of those Padlets that I mentioned. So everything's on
Yes.
there. And I figure that way people can just click around and use things as they like. I know one thing when it comes to student behavior that I like to provide, it's kind of a self-reflection form about just class-wide PBIS stuff. So it has things on there that are evidence-based effective classroom practices that you should be implementing, things like how am I going to establish behavior expectations? How am I going to structure procedures? How am I going to actively engage students and provide opportunities to respond? So it's all those pieces that we know have to be part of a class-wide plan, kind of laid out with some think about questions or self-assessment or
Mhm.
reflection considerations in a one-pager. So I'll usually provide that. And then in addition to that, I started to put together a kind of a chart for tiered classroom management plans. So it has those pieces that I just mentioned where teachers can just check off, yep, 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 here's how I'm doing that. But then my next layer, what typically happens in my next layer? Well, in my next layer, we typically add more structure to trigger times or procedures. And so check that box. Here's how I'm going to do it. So it kind of walks teachers through establishing that tiered plan within their classroom and kind of documenting it or memorializing it. So those are two things that I'm happy to share, and I usually find myself giving out a lot when it comes to the behavior piece. When it comes to the support adult piece and fading that back, it seems like first off, really nailing down what the adult is doing to support that child, because if I don't ask really specific prompts, people aren't always able to put it into words. Oh, well, she sits next to Sally in this class, or so I've got one sheet that kind of prompts you through what the different class routines are and what the adult is doing in terms of that support that's being provided. And then in conjunction with it, I put together just I forget how, it's a couple of pages of just, so during this time, here's ways to facilitate independence and fade yourself back during the start of class. So it goes by those different class routines that we just talked about. What are you doing as the support adult in there to support Sally? And then gives you ideas of other things that you could do. So you could create your own kind of fade plan using those two documents. So those are two I usually like to share out.
Great, thank you. And I forget who it was. I think it might have been Alyssa. When I had her as a guest, she said that your Padlets are legendary. And
Aw,
she that was something that she recommended that people look at, or your Padlets. So yeah.
everybody's welcome. They're all public.
Yeah. So, Michelle, thank you so much for your time today to share information about both of your sessions from our summer conference. I appreciate you taking the time to record this episode with me. So, thank you and have a great day.
Thank you. You too. Thank you.
We thank you for listening to this episode of the Inclusion Think Tank podcast. This podcast is brought to you by All In for Inclusive Education. Be sure to subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Stay tuned for new episodes of the podcast premiering every 2 weeks. We're all in. Are you?